My name is Betsy Cooper. It is my extreme pleasure to be here today. As you heard this morning, we are announcing the launching of the Aspen Tech Policy Hub, which is a West Coast-based policy incubator training tech experts on the policy process. And so it's my particular pleasure to be moderating this panel because one of the key areas I think most in the room, and certainly many of the panelists today, have talked about that requires additional policy innovation is the cybersecurity workforce. As we heard in the Five Eyes panel this morning, it is one of the most important areas where improvements are needed. So I'm thrilled to moderate this discussion. Our panelists absolutely need no introduction in this space, but we have a few small changes in the way they were portrayed, so I'd love to introduce them anyways. First, to my left is Dr. John Kelly. He is the Senior Vice President at IBM and the leader of IBM Research. He is also an Aspen Cyber Strategy Group member. Second is Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee, member of the House Committees on the Judiciary and Homeland Security, and of course, important for this discussion, member of the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity. Next, I'd like to congratulate Brigadier General Jennifer Buckner because we accidentally gave her a 2-star promotion in our program. She is actually the head of cyber for the Army staff. And finally, we have my longtime friend, Matt Olson, who is Chief Trust and Security Officer for Uber. So thank you all for joining us today. So I'd like to start by framing up the question of the cyber talent pipeline. For each of you, I'd love to hear, what do you consider the biggest challenges right now in terms of developing the cybersecurity workforce?
Well, happy to start. And being part of the panel, but also IBM taking the lead on this particular portion with respect to the workforce, just to tee up the problem, the demand for skills in cybersecurity is growing at a rapid rate, while the supply is growing only slightly. So that gap in our supply line, if you will, of skills, by all estimates is about 500,000 people over the next 3 years or so. That's an enormous gap. So the challenge then for us is to think about not only what are some point solutions, but what are some solutions that will scale to the order of 500,000 workers. We're pleased to take the lead. We'll talk a lot, I think, Betsy, about the different sort of techniques that we've come up with and the recommendations, but there's a few in there that I find really exciting because we're not going to solve a problem that size with normal techniques. And so I think just to sort of start the discussion, looking at really what kind of skills do we need, because sometimes we say, well, we need somebody that can do this, when we really don't need that. We don't need an upper level degree or whatever. We just need the proper training, and we're going to discuss some of the methods to do that. So this is a very exciting area, but as we discuss this, I think we need to keep in mind that it's an enormous gap, and we need solutions that really scale.
Great. Other thoughts on the biggest challenges in the cybersecurity workforce?
Well, if I might, first of all, thank you very much, and thank you to the Aspen Institute. And as I'm in California as a guest, let me make mention of the tragedy in Los Angeles and to offer this state my deepest concern as a member of the Homeland Security Committee and one that deals with these issues on a regular basis in the United States Congress. And I hope that we'll have a chance to find a way to end that kind of violence, and that kind of loss of innocent life. But as I listened to the previous panel, I clearly want to use the term resiliency, because I think what the problem is, as I listened and read your report, is that we do not have a deep, if you will, farm team. We don't have a trajectory. We don't have the reach to so many of the talented persons or the persons who could fill those 470,000 vacancies coming up in 3 years. 2 out of 3 high school students have never had anyone talk to them about a cybersecurity career. Frankly, when you go to schools, they're still talking about computer technology. And we really have gone beyond that. So part of what I think we will have to face is building our farm team in the far reaches of the community and the nation. So you know you're going to hear many of us in the federal government talk about how do we build that farm team. 11% of women are in cybersecurity, 25% in IT. Only 7% African Americans, and I think a lesser number of Hispanics, are in cybersecurity. That is a large group of potential hirees that we need to be able to focus on. Lastly, I would say, and I'll expand on this, we really need to get our immigration policies together. The terminology that Congress has used is a comprehensive immigration policy. We're frankly not even where we should be on H-1Bs. We've sort of retrenched, and there's talk about diminishing legal immigration, which is what H-1Bs and other visas are about. So I think the tech industry can be, in this meeting today, can be very helpful and very effective in helping to craft a private-public proposal based upon work that's already been done on how we reach those who will be very viable in this industry.
Great. Other thoughts? What about the perspective from the Army? How is it going in terms of recruiting for individuals?
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to highlight some of the things that the military is doing in this space because it is fundamentally changing the way that we look at our military force. All of the services, the Army included, have carved out these specialties, so we recognize that much like our traditional branches like infantry and armor or pilots, that the cyber specialty needs, this is a domain of warfare, it is an aspect of competition that is vital to our national security. So all of us as services have carved out a specialty in which you can enlist, you can be commissioned as an officer, and there is a growth path, a professional development path for you in this space. So particularly for the Marines, that was a real change in the way that we look at warriors. But all of us have done that because we really needed to. We've carved out operational commands as a home for these specialists. And increasingly, we're seeing changes in legislation that allow us a much greater flexibility to reward them, to recognize their skill sets with incentive pays, with faster promotions, and things like that. And I think I'd highlight in the Army that we now have the ability to directly commission officers, not as lieutenants, but actually as colonels. And to recognize that we have private sector counterparts who would like to serve and perhaps would consider a tour in uniform. And so we can now reward that, if you will, and bring them in at the right level in order to recognize those skill sets. So that's interesting to me, and I think I just highlight where we continue to have challenges, and I'd really like to, we continue to work on ways that we would on and off ramp different tours of duty. So the idea that we could be you could do a tour in the military, you could do a tour in one of the intelligence agencies, and you could serve in other ways in government, and making those on and off ramps much easier.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I would like to just pick up on Congresswoman, your 3 points, because I'm relatively new at Uber, and I think sort of Uber's challenges reflect the challenges generally at technology companies like ours. But I think from Washington's perspective, that you hit the nail on the head. The bringing in the talent and building that talent from the ground up through education, that's a problem and a challenge in filling those roles because we don't have the pipeline. Diversity continues to be a challenge, whether talking about African Americans, Latinos, women in this space, and then bringing in talent from around the world, because it's not just here in the United States, but around the world that this talent and expertise exists, and figuring out how to tap into that. So I think your points really, from my vantage point on the ground here, really hit it on the head. So I think, and I know we're going to talk more about all of those challenges, but I see that in real life here.
Fantastic. And on the diversity point, I did want to point out that this is one of the first times in my career that I've been on a panel where there are more women than men talking about cybersecurity. So So props to the organizers, and for disclosure, I was not one of them. So I do now want to turn to the big release of this report. And John, I know that you played a key role in helping to put this together. So this is the Aspen Cyber Strategy Group report on growing the workforce. And it lays out 8 principles, and we're going to dig into the specifics of some of those. But before we get into that, I'd love you just to give a little bit of background on why the focus on the cyber workforce, how sort of the working group came together, and maybe some of the bullet points of these recommendations that you think are so important.
Sure. Well, it was a great working group representing all the constituents, and we really dug in and went deeply in trying to understand the problem. And we always had a goal, whatever our recommendations were, they had to be actionable. We had to put them into action, not just write a paper and put it on the shelf, so to speak. So we came up with 8 recommendations. They're all, I think, very, very interesting and implementable. But I'll just reference 2 or 3 of them quickly. One is all around matching the job description precisely to the skill level needed, because oftentimes we overspec the job and then people are rejected because they can't meet some dimension of the spec. Some will say, oh, he's got to have a 4-year degree. Well, not necessarily. So we're recommending, and all these, by the way, IBM ourselves are doing. So we're going back and revamping all of our job descriptions to match what really is required with the job, because many of these jobs can be done with 2-year degrees. Another one that we know can scale learning is apprenticeship programs. So we've got about 150 people in IBM now that are in an apprentice program with experts in cybersecurity in our SOCs around the world, and we're going to scale that by 10x in the next year. So these are things, when they work, you can scale them rapidly. And the last one that really excites me is the public-private partnerships. I think we're only going to solve this together. And I'll just give 2 quick examples. Again, I sort of use IBM as a can it be done. We have a program called PTech, which is Pathways to Technology, which takes the young students and starts to educate them in STEM, pulls them through a 2-year program, and then we basically staple a job to it. And these people are amazing, amazing. They can go to work in any of our SOCs, any place on the globe. That's on the one extreme. We mentioned diversity. We also have a scholarship fellowship program with the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, that we're very proud of, where there's a very diverse student population. And so we're trying to not only gain the interest of the students, but maintain the interest and put them on leading edge projects. When these kids come out of that, everybody wants to hire them. So those 3 things, I think, are really exciting. Match the job and the job description. Use an apprenticeship program to really start to scale the training beyond. You don't have to wait for the education system to catch up. And then public-private partnership. And these, again, are all things that are actionable that we all can do leaving this room today.
So I'm not sure whether we planned this or not, but we're actually going to dig into each of those 3 topics in the next section of the discussion.
I can go into the other 5 if you give me an hour.
We'll get there eventually. But so first, let's talk about academic degrees, because I think this is actually maybe one of the more controversial areas that the report teases out. There's a lot of discussion. A huge number of universities are currently investing either in cybersecurity master's degree programs or potentially undergrad minors in which people can get more training. I can see both sides of the issue of whether a degree is required. As a former university employee myself, you can see that academic institutions do an excellent job of providing training, and they're set up in a way that gives them the ability, especially with online education, to scale that. On the other hand, not everybody is equipped to get that computer science degree as an undergrad major, and oftentimes those degree programs do lack practical skills that enable somebody to translate. So you hear stories of somebody coming out with a degree and then the company needing several years to train people to come into that. it seems as though the report comes down on the side of the argument that degrees may be overemphasized, and so I'd love the panelists' opinion on that. Maybe looking first to Matt and Jennifer, but to all the panelists, do you see the value of academic degrees when hiring for cybersecurity jobs?
So I think it's really important when we talk about cybersecurity jobs to recognize that that's a huge, broad swath of skills and experiences and positions. And certainly for some, so-called cybersecurity jobs, yes, you need to have a degree, if not an advanced degree. Talking to the team at Uber, where much of our cybersecurity expertise they are engineers, they're builders, and they're building cybersecurity tools, security as a service to the rest of the company, so that the rest of the building that's going on across Uber is being made secure from the ground up. And that requires people who are themselves engineers and have deep understanding of how to do that. And so there's a skill set that certainly at that level requires advanced degrees. But at the other, there are a number of other jobs that I've had exposure to over the course of my career that do not, working, for example, around SOCs, security operations centers, working among threat hunters, some of them former military, for example, who are second to none at doing that, but they certainly don't need a PhD in computer science or electrical engineering to be successful. So I think it's a wide swath of experiences.
I think we also see a great diversity of how you can contribute in this space. So certainly particularly among our commissioned officers, that computer scientists kind of are the nucleus, but we've learned that the outlier talent, that traditional STEM degrees, we made a big push for applied mathematicians, a lot of engineers. We also delve into the electronic warfare intersection, so natural sciences, and the idea that we need this diversity of skills, and then we can task organize or form small teams with different skill sets, apply them to hard problems, and then when that's done, quickly break them up and redistribute. I think, to John's point as well, that a lot of those grade school and high school programs really bring out those with aptitude. Yes. And then you can really tailor the right program, whether that's more hands-on or that's the more academic piece. But I think that's really led us to concentrate on identifying passion and aptitude as opposed to just going for this is my degree.
Well, let me, I think you don't have to have one or the other. You can have both. You can begin by not having a degree, and then you can be engaged to the extent that you see where you need to have a degree, and that means that's the more matured employee that started young through a variety of programs, and then in wanting to develop their own growth, may wind up ultimately PhD in engineering. But I think what is most crucial is the reach. We're not going to fill the positions if we are not aggressive in the reach. And I'm sure there are probably champion video players in here, or video players. Is anybody aware of the 50,000 young people that go around the country and have video competition? If you have not, you're not in the in crowd, because that is the new Super Bowl. To the extent that they make big purses, if you will.
We have an esports arena now in Oakland, let me tell you. It is very popular. My neighborhood has parking problems as a result. So.
There lies part of your foundation for cybersecurity expertise.
Right.
So I would just, because we need to become resilient more quickly than I think we are, I think we again need to not dismiss college education and or graduate degrees, certainly in the level that we in the federal government, when it gets into national security issues, corporate issues, that kind of expertise is needed. But I'd like to be able to develop the stair steps, to be able to develop the pathway. And with that in mind, I'm very interested in expanding that. And so I would look to even starting our outreach at a very early stage. And some, John, who may not have been in the STEM program per se, but they have an aptitude, if you will, for that. and we'll get on later about my interest in apprenticeship programs, on-the-job training, and something that I'd like to pursue as we go into the 116th Congress, which is a National Guard for cyber defense, which is a sort of a civilian face to cyber defense, while the military is doing an excellent job, but a civilian face that includes academicians and others. So I just think that we need to think big if we're going to be able to really be competitive internationally.
I totally agree with all the comments. The only thing I would add is also the tools that we give people to do these jobs. What we find in our workforce, if we give them better analytics tools, and now with the advent of AI in these tools, we can really raise the game of the performance of a person, and they learn much faster. So I think in a sense we're building a new on-ramp with these tools and AI for more people to be able to do these jobs with what previously was thought to be inadequate formal education.
Fantastic, and time permitting, I hope to come very much back to the AI and workforce questions. But first, let's turn to training and apprenticeship. So Congresswoman Jackson-Lee, I know this is an area that you care deeply about. Could you tell us a little bit about what Congress has been thinking about in this space, what you're hoping to do in Congress with these apprenticeship programs, and why you think this is a solution that people should be caring more about?
Well, I think, as I've noted, I think in earlier discussions, the one thing that government has in Congress is a bully pulpit so that we can extend what we do to the public and private sector. And the previous point that I made, veterans who have been so well trained when they're active duty is another population of individuals that we should not dismiss. And I know that many companies over the last decade have made a very special interest in getting veterans. But I have legislation to equate the work that veterans are doing as a member of the United States military to how they would be retained or recruited or hired in the private sector, to give quality assessment to what they have been doing in the military, so that you have a military personnel that are going to come out after 10 years, a lot of them after 10 years, maybe 4 or 5, but 10 years or maybe even longer, 20 years, that they can be a more vital asset to your particular company by giving them, by equating some of that. And maybe veterans, of course, would be interested in going back to school, but they come with such an enormous amount of depth of understanding. They also come with an easy ability for security clearances, which is something that I think is an important issue. But we're talking about the Cybersecurity Education and Workforce Enhancement Act and the DHS Cybersecurity on-the-job training and employment apprentice program. And so what we're trying to do is, in one place, to improve the training of our present federal civilian force. Ultimately, we know that that civilian force may leave and go into the private sector. So preparing across agencies to have a population of cybersecurity experts in every agency that we have, which we really don't have now, though we're sort of moving in that direction. I think there should be more investment. Because if we have cybersecurity experts, they, by the very interaction of their task, Department of Energy, obviously Commerce, Department of Justice, any number of agencies that you wouldn't, HHS, dealing with pharmaceuticals and others, they interact with the private sector and can be very helpful in cross-pollinating. The other is to do on-the-job training. So apprenticeships beginning in government and then translating them to the private sector. One of the bills that is an overlap is what I call my zero-day legislation that has been passed by the House and ready to be passed by the Senate. But that's the one where we want to assure the private sector that when they share information, we had some earlier discussions on that, with the federal government, that that information is protected, and then it can come back in a protected manner as well. You need trained staff in the government to assure the private sector that there are firewalls around information that they give, and the information is about vulnerabilities. So most companies are not really interested in sort of edifying and providing enlightenment about what their vulnerabilities are. But the only way we can make our system strong, resilient, is if we know it. You will need people inside the government that can handle that information, interpret that information. So we're trying to clean our own house up by doing in-house training, funding just for that, and then extend it out to the private sector.
Great responses from the panel. How do you perceive those sorts of suggestions, and particularly the idea of growing apprenticeship programs?
I think we've had the opportunity, there have been some fantastic examples of many of those, and so instead of starting our own, I think that we in the military try to build on the success of these, if you will, these startup apprenticeships, and so in an unusual way, for example, cyber defense teams that we see local communities sponsoring. We have the ability we bring our military expertise and we serve as coaches and mentors for these teams. And in places like Augusta, Georgia, where you see this concerted effort, we went from about 2 teams in the local community 3 years ago to now over 60. And each of those has, a military or a government civilian mentor, and what a fantastic competition program. It's actually run, Cyber Patriot competition's actually run by the Air Force, but phenomenal success. Gen Cyber Camps, run by NSA. We add a moral, ethical leadership component to that, so that when you're learning those technical skills, that no matter how you apply them, whether through government service or into the private sector, that you bring an ethical framework to that. And we also now are increasingly sending our cadets, our soldiers, our officers out to private industry for internships. And I think that will lend itself to more of the public-private partnerships in the future and ways that foster mutual understanding to further the way that we would share information in a productive and safe way.
Those are amazing programs. We have a couple of programs at Uber that are in the nature of apprenticeship. First, we encourage mobility within the company, and those skill sets, those engineering and building skill sets apply, across the board. And we help train people who are interested in moving into the security field. We also have a program of outreach to college students. It's got a diversity element to it. Bringing college students, it's a group of about 20 students who we brought to Uber 4 times over the course of a year. We mentor them for a day, and then they are entered into the track for being hired out of college. Something that we're going to double down on in the next year in 2019. I think one point that occurs to me more generally as we talk about this is the benefit of the report that Aspen did and your team did, John, to highlight the need here. My last job in government was leading the National Counterterrorism Center. When we posted a position for an analyst at NCTC, we probably had 20-to-1 applicants for those jobs, right? These were young people who had degrees. They could have done a lot of different things. They could have gone to Wall Street and made a lot of money, and they wanted to go fight Al-Qaeda more than anything else. It feels to me like we need to translate that kind of energy and imperative and urgency and commitment and really patriotism into this effort, so that kind of idea of going into the counterterrorism world, we need that into the cybersecurity world. And once those jobs take on that kind of a mindset, and we as sort of leaders in this field can help do that, and this report I think does a fantastic job of doing that as well. We can ignite that kind of interest and excitement around these positions. That'll make a big difference.
Can I build on that a little bit? Because I think that is one of the major issues that we should be engaged in. What is cybersecurity? If you were just having dinner and somebody overheard you talking about cybersecurity, they wouldn't gain any knowledge. But it's really important because there are young people now coming up that are probably not even at the level of those who are applying for that one job. And because their reach and the technology and what excites them is so different. It moves every 6 months or less. Just listen to their vernacular. Is to explain how cybersecurity permeates the very existence and security of their daily lives. From the financial services to the water they drink, to the electric grid, which we discussed throughout the day. You've got to, in expanding the desire to participate in a professional commitment to cybersecurity, by way of positional training is how much it is integrated in one's life. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do. If I might cite two organizations, the Congressional Hispanic Institute, which is a 501c3 that deals with internships and is engaged in not only internships in Washington, but in this whole question of technology. And the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation that does the same thing and tries to be as broad-based as possible by bringing young people from all over the country. But I do think we have to do, those of us who understand that this need, I don't even want to call it an industry, this need is going to continue to grow and grow and grow, that it is crucial that we make it so much so that someone says, send me. I really want to get involved in cybersecurity.
That's an excellent transition to a question about partnerships, because I think it's really important to show that it's not just employers that have to engage in this space, but broader partnerships, and that was certainly a theme of the report. I'd like to start with the private sector. So first, John and Matt, could you talk a little bit about how you see partnerships with organizations other than your own and how those have helped you or how you hope they might help you improve the cybersecurity workforce problems we're talking about?
Well, again, we think this problem is so big, even an IBM with nearly 500,000 employees can't solve this problem. We have to do it in partnerships, not only with government and academic institutions, but with each other. Because we have to, all boats will rise, but we have to get the whole thing going up together at scale. So it's not about competing over one or two people, it's getting the whole pool up. And so we're doubling down with, again, industrial partners and coming together in areas like this with the Institute, and partnering heavily with the educational institutions at all levels, all the way from the high schools through the graduate levels, because we can only do this through partnership.
Great.
Yeah, I agree with you, John, and I've been gratified to see in educational institutions. I live in Maryland. University of Maryland certainly is a place that has been a leader in cybersecurity education. So my own son's at the University of Virginia. He told me he was taking a class he's a computer science major, he's taking a class called Defense Against the Dark Arts. It's a pretty cool name for a cybersecurity class, I thought. And that in and of itself could recruit some future cybersecurity expertise. But the other obvious partner for us is in the government, and understanding that the skill set that's developed within the intelligence community, NSA in particular, within the military, around cybersecurity, those are skills, as well as I think the imperative to hire veterans is a place that we would, I'd certainly look for partnerships to fill these open positions. And let me say one other thing, because I completely agree with you, John. We sometimes do look at, we lost this one person to this other company. No. We have to move beyond that. I understand why we feel that way sometimes, because it's a very competitive market, especially here. But we need to understand we're all in the same boat, and we need to work together. And I do see that happening.
And if I could just add, I think it's we've really fundamentally changed the way that we look at developing this talent. That we certainly hope that they would consider a career in service, but the idea that they don't necessarily have to do 20 years or a full career in order for us to reap a benefit, that if they somehow contribute in a tangible way. And I love the highlight in the last panel when they highlighted the New York Cyber Command, because that is an example. One of the architects of that was an Army captain, a company commander in our cyber brigade, and he leaves and he kind of takes what he's learned, but he applies it to a different problem set, and that's, I think, exactly what we would hope for in terms of that growth of talent, that development of talent.
Fantastic. So I'd like to move on to two topics that the report doesn't touch on as much, but I think are incredibly important for the cyber workforce space. So first is the role of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Already had a great panel earlier on that, but I think it's worth emphasizing the potential here. And I heard on the one hand, there's the potential for artificial intelligence to change the way existing cybersecurity employees do their jobs. So potentially adding a boon to the ability to be more effective or efficient. On the other hand, some have written about the fears that some of the training, especially that universities are doing to prepare people for the future workforce, will change as the things that they're able to do now will be automated in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. So how are you thinking about the way new technologies such as these will affect the cybersecurity workforce?
Well, if I could start, as I commented earlier, right now, if you were to look inside of the IBM software security products, every single one of them has machine learning at some level in those products, every single one. We know that when we take our analytics tools that our SOC operators are using and we put artificial intelligence capability in a man plus machine, we get much better performance. They can look at more threats and come up with actions that are much more precise, much more rapidly. So we can help that. I think the question going forward, and it's a little off topic with respect to workforce, but there's no question that this puck is moving to an AI versus AI world. It is going to be an AI war. And the role of humans in that, I think, is critical. Exactly what it is, I honestly don't think we know yet. But every advanced threat we see today has some level of artificial intelligence in it. And the only way you can stop those at deep machine speed is with an AI defense.
Other thoughts?
I would just pick up on that exact point, and I'm glad you went there to the other side of the AI picture, right? Because I agree with respect to the tools that are being developed, and we can turn a tier 1 analyst into a tier 2 or even a tier 3 analyst, right? We can really up their game and make them better at their jobs, and of course the flip side of that is the adversary has access to those same tools, and so the net effect is that there's going to continue to be a need for these jobs and humans in the calculation, and we have to continue to focus on our ability to meet this from a defensive position.
If I might, everybody's business is cybersecurity. As I listened, it made me think more and more, because the federal government has to be a partner. And if we're going to be a partner, the question is, do we invest monetarily in finding a way to expand the enhanced training to create either partnerships with universities to intensify the training on our AI, because I am still deeply concerned that our resiliency is not where it needs to be, and that the creation of jobs is fast-paced, but they're changing jobs. So one of the things that I think is crucial that we're looking at is making sure that we, the government, are, besides Department of Defense, are sophisticated enough that we're keeping up with what the changes are. And we also, in order to partnership with the private sector, to say, are you keeping up with the academic end of it? Because colleges and community colleges, which I want to emphasize, historically black colleges, Hispanic serving colleges, all need to be kept up, even though they've got brilliant professors, with what the changing world looks like in technology, in computer science, in cybersecurity. So one of the things that we're discussing is the investment by the federal government in some aspects of making sure that we're at the cutting edge of the educational training and the partnerships between the private sector and the public sector.
Fantastic. And as we're getting towards the end of our time, I did want to come back to a theme that came up several times here, which was diversity. I'd love any quick thoughts about how we can improve diversity in cybersecurity across a whole array, including obviously racial, gender, ethnic diversity, but also even in terms of degree, ability to get from academic degrees other than computer science. So any quick thoughts on ideas of what we can do in that space?
We just have to make it a priority. We just have to make it a priority. I mean, that is a reason we went. There's great talent, again, at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, but it's one of the most diverse populations of students you could ask for. And so we intentionally went there and intentionally are investing in them because we think it's important to have that kind of diverse workforce. So it's just make it a priority.
And outreach through a number of programs, but in grade school, to make sure that you reach as many children as possible, so that they have both the opportunity and means to kind of foster that talent.
Make this world attractive. and there are cultural differences. And I emphasized before, I mentioned before, find the historically black colleges. There's a network of them, Hispanic serving institutions. There's a network of them. It works extensively when there is an interface, not only the interface between the private sector, but we in government too can reach out to academic institutions to be able to, I think it was mentioned here, prick their consciousness of patriotism. But it only pricked if they know what cybersecurity or where they can go with their commitment to a cybersecurity career. I think the other thing that we should consider is, from the government perspective, is how do we get young people prepared to pass security clearances, which can be a challenge.
Especially in the Valley.
It can be a challenge. And that's one of my advocacies and commitment, because you can have a security clearance and wind up on the wrong end of the issue. We've seen some situations like that that are most current, and some of those people have even been in the private sector. But we've got to be able to emphasize value of a security clearance, what it is, so that the people we bring into this industry have a growth ability and be able to let that diversity not just be at one level, but ascend up the ladder.
And I very much appreciate that as somebody who is not the typical cybersecurity person up here either. Definitely have not played many of the video games that others have.
And Betsy, if I could just add one on
Sure.
to all these, I agree with all my colleagues. I think one of the things I've noticed is just, along with the commitment needed, is some flexibility on our part as employers. Like, for example, a relatively concrete one is just being able to work remotely in terms of diversity, right? So you can make it easier for people to work from their home or from a city where they're not at headquarters, right? And there's ways to do that in this field, and I think that expands the opportunities for people to, and diversity as a consequence.
Fantastic, and very much agreed. And so I'd love to end the panel with just the one key bumper sticker takeaway. I gave myself a tongue twister. If you could share one lesson with the audience, a one-liner about the future of the cyber talent pipeline, what would it be?
We must make sure that we shoot ahead of the duck. And what I mean by that is that we're educating for what the threat will be, not what it is. So, educating now in networking is not, it'll be useful, but not terribly useful if it's going to be an AI versus AI war. And every student, in my mind, that's in the educational pipeline now is going to live in a world of quantum computing, and that is a game changer. So we must shoot ahead because this technology is advancing so quickly.
Fantastic. Bumper sticker, Congresswoman?
As we shoot ahead, let us not close the door to any defined young person that comes from a diverse background. And you would be amazed at the potential that is waiting to be reached. And so let's keep the door open, and let's use a wide breadth and wing spread to reach these young people who are very eager and exciting to do so, to be engaged.
Fantastic.
I would again just highlight the phenomenal talent that who are currently serving in uniform, young talent that I didn't know existed before we kind of carved out this specialty, but they understand their unique role in defending this nation, and they also, I think, are teaching us how best to conduct outreach, to develop, to bring up those future cyber defenders.
And Matt, last word?
Yeah, so cybersecurity is obviously an imperative for our companies and our national security, but the bumper sticker might just be, cybersecurity is a super cool job.
And that's the perfect note to end on. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for participating.